Can you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Weddleton? Ms. Zolotel?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy? Ms. Kennedy, are you on the line? Okay. Chair Rivera?
Present.
Vice Chair LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Peterson? Is he excused? Mr. Peterson is absent. Mr. Constant?
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Perez Verdilla?
Here.
Mr. Dyson?
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Moving on to Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Spafford, can you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's a stretch.
Thank you. Moving on to old business, we have just one item, item 4A, notice of reconsideration. And just for the members of the public, this was a consent agenda item when it was before us at our last meeting. So we will not be having a public hearing on this item. So we have before us notice of reconsideration, Assembly Memorandum number AM 747-2019, sole source contract with Streamline AM LLC to produce an implementation plan for construction of a waste-to-energy facility for the municipality of Anchorage. So we have the motion before us to reconsider by Ms. Zolotel and seconded by Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I sent an email per the chair's request earlier outlining the reasons for reconsideration and outstanding questions I had for tonight's meeting. I think it pretty much speaks for itself as to the reasons, and I hope the members have had a chance to read it.
Do you want to walk us through both for the members and the public, just briefly?
Sure, briefly. So I filed reconsideration primarily on 2 points. The first was that the AM listed the contract being for construction implementation. The second was the sole source nature of the contract. In speaking with Mr. Slivka, who I thank for taking the time to walk through a lot of my concerns with me, the calling it a construction implementation plan may have been a poor choice of words. So that concern isn't necessarily the primary concern. The primary concern is the sole source nature of the contract. Originally, the feasibility report that we have suggesting waste to energy would be something we might want to move forward with was done. This is where it gets to me a little bit complicated, but it came from AWU to Streamline, and that was done through a term contract that AWU already had with Streamline, and then Streamline contracted or subcontracted with Geosyntec, who produced the white paper feasibility report. And that didn't, that original term contract came before the Assembly, but that specific type of work did not. Second, this here is a sole source contract, and one of the justifications is that Streamline has information and familiarity with the project. 2 points to that. One, really Geosyntec is the one with the technical expertise because they were the subcontractor. And two, if we start down a path of sole source contracting because it's familiarity with the project and the people, we really start heading down a road where we are not justifying opening it up again on technical things. Waste to energy is a big deal, and in this case, while it may save a little bit of time, Geosyntec's feasibility study, and for the public, which is online, is comprehensive and would be, I think, sufficient to bring anybody up or potential bidder up to the next phase because it outlines next action steps pretty clearly. And finally, the other point for sole source was this sense of urgency around AWU needing potentially to replace an incinerator, and the central transfer station RFP for design already being on the street. But if that's the case, then maybe this should be a more limited contract if we want to know just about how waste to energy might interact with those two more urgent things. And then finally, the scope and timing of the work in the AM was concerning to me. It's expected to be completed in 90 days, a $100,000 contract for 90 days worth of work. I guess we should have high expectations for what we're going to get for $100,000. It's not an insignificant amount of work yet. I'm not really sure everything we're going to get. And then I had and the sole source nature raised some community concerns. I got phone calls, and I've never had phone calls about a sole source contract, and this isn't coming from potential competitors. So I finally wrap up in saying that waste to energy is a big commitment. I'm not opposed to the idea, but since it's such a big commitment by the municipality, we should have a public of a process and hear from as many viewpoints as possible. So that's why I've asked for reconsideration.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Alatel. So the vote before us is yes, puts this item before us, no, does not, and then the previous vote is what is on the record. Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if we were to vote to reconsider, then this would be pushed to maybe this.
That would be before us right now, if we voted yes to reconsider.
Okay, so there won't be an opportunity in any case to get more information about this, or?
That would be a yes vote. So if you wanted to get more information right now at this meeting before voting on it again, then vote yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking we had to work.
Right, and so the clerk reminds me, it's of course up to the will of the body whether you feel like you need more information or not. So there's always the ability to move to postpone the item after it's back before us. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just so I'm clear, if I may ask Ms. Zelatel if, yes, you still want to move forward with reconsideration and discussing this item? Or were your concerns already addressed through conversations with the administration and through the email? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, they're not adequately, because they've been somewhat evolving, my concerns. Like, we got there, we got really close, and then I got another phone call. So it's really raised a lot of red flags that I guess before I would be comfortable voting yes on the underlying contract, I would want some more answers, or I might want to change my vote, hence the reconsideration, because it feels like this has been a moving target for me in the last week, the more public input I seem to be getting about it.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if, in terms of process, if I have questions that I'd like to address to the administration or Mr. Spafford, is it appropriate to ask those now as a part of the conversation for reconsideration, or do you believe that that's appropriate after the vote?
Correct. It would be appropriate after the vote.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson, on the motion before us.
That you could get the information before our meeting on Tuesday?
So to be clear, Mr. Dyson, so if we vote yes to reconsider this item, it is back before us right now. So we'll be deliberating the item, and as the clerk advised, the body can decide to postpone this item to a future meeting. But I think the intent is to clarify what we can right now. With that, let's go ahead and vote on the motion to reconsider.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Kennedy.
My vote is yes.
Thank you. So that is passed 9-2, so we have the item before us. Any discussion on the item?
We have a motion? We don't have a motion.
Do we need to have another motion? Okay, so what is the will of the body?
Move to approve. Oh, sorry. Did someone want to move to postpone?
I'd move to postpone to December 10th. We have a meeting then for Alaska Sense, might as well fill it up.
I'm not. Mr. Weddleton, I think that meeting, we should just have Alaska Sense on that meeting. So if we're going to do this, I would suggest December 3rd.
5 hours for Alaska Sense?
We don't know how long that's going to take.
How's December 3rd's agenda?
It's actually not very full.
December 3rd
We
work?
might not make it to midnight, so we better put that on here.
All right, I change that. Move to postpone to December 3rd.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Mr. Peterson on the motion before us.
No, I was going to ask Mr. Spafford a question.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton, do you want to speak to the motion?
I think Megan's done a really good job outlining a variety of issues here, and I appreciate her doing that. And I think that means I'd like to have it open for public hearing then, if she has people who have stuff to say regarding this. I'd like to hear it in a more open public process, and that would give us an opportunity to do that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dunbar on the motion before us.
Yeah, and it's fine if we're going to postpone until December 3rd, then we have someone from purchasing will be there presumably. But is there anyone from purchasing here tonight that could speak to this?
I believe Mr. Haddon's on the phone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Correct, Mr. Dunbar, I am on the phone.
Thank you, Mr. Haddon. So would it be cleaner for us just to vote this down and for you to go through a new process? Or do you prefer to have us postpone it? And then also, why can't this go out to competitive bid? What's the harm? And we're talking about investing hundreds of millions of dollars. This is $100,000. Seems like we would want to really dot our I's and cross our T's. What's the harm in putting this out to a more competitive process?
Mr. Dunbar, to be very frank, there is no harm in putting it out to a competitive solicitation.
Can I have a follow-up to that, Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Mr. Spafford, you look like you want to say something. So, okay.
So through the chair, I was given direction by my boss, Ethan Berkowitz, to get this done in as quickly and as timely a manner as possible. And using our existing term contracts, which is a competitively awarded engineering, it goes through the same process that we're talking about this RFP would go through right now. That's what I wanted to do through the first time. Our purchasing officer didn't like that idea. He wanted us to go through a sole source. We wrote up the sole source justification. The purchasing officer, Ron Haddon, approved it, and so that's why we're here. If we go through we can go through the RFP process, but the RFP process takes 3 to 4 months, and there's, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, there's no reason for us to do that when the purchasing officer, in my opinion, has already said this is approved, he's good to go with the justification we provided. And also, we have term contractors to do work just like this for us that are already on board. And so while I appreciate everybody's concern about this, we're not committing ourselves to anything other than developing a plan that we are going to sit down with the assembly and talk to you all about that's going to say, this is exactly what we have to do. Here's what the first step is going to be. Here's what the second step is going to be. Here's what the third step is going to be. Here's what each one of these steps are going to cost. It's going to take us 7 to 10 years to do this work. What do you want me to do as the general manager of the Department of Solid Waste Services? That's what it's going to tell us. And it's going to give you guys the opportunity to have all of the information in front of you. And we're not going to have to wait another 4 to 5 months to get an RFP done and get this work completed.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
So what you're describing is basically we're contracting someone to show us how to do something. And I think that the concern is we're sort of one step back from that, whether or not we should do this thing. And we're worried, and I don't want to put words in my colleague's mouth, but we're a little worried that the person who has been thus far promoting this thing is being asked whether or not we should do this thing. And so logically it seems like they are going to say yes. How do you respond to that?
I guess can you rephrase that question? Sorry. I'm not quite following you.
So with this contract, are we trying to find someone to sort of tell us whether or not we ought to do this thing? Or are we sort of taking as a given that we ought to do this thing and this person is showing us how to do it?
The latter of those.
Okay.
So the pre-feasibility study basically did the analysis on all the different waste-to-energy technologies that are out there and commercially available right now. And based on our situation and obviously that person's professional opinion, who is a subject matter expert who has been developing these projects longer than I've been alive, his recommendation was based on our size, our situation, our desires here as a community, mass burn was the best waste-to-energy technology.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
If I could maybe have a question, but I'm kind of drawing on Meg's letter here. Were you going to go through some of these and ask Mark some questions? Or because I'm chomping at the bit. Let me ask this question, but it's your question. Well, we're voting, so I don't know. I mean,
So, so we do have the vote before us to postpone this item, which I think does hinder us a little bit on our ability to discuss the item. But I guess in so much as you think your questions would weigh in our vote to postpone or not, then I am fine with you asking Ms. Alatel.
well, it does, and I think because what Forrest brought up is maybe we just vote this down and then they just start their process over and go to competitive bid. And Mark, if you could come up, I got a question. And one that Meg asked is, so it's a contract with Streamline, but Geosyntac did the study. Why don't we go straight to Geosyntac? I mean, if you open it and skip out the middleman and,
Through the chair, I don't have a large engineering staff, and as you know, we have lots and lots of projects that are going on right now, and my two engineers are basically tapped out. I would love to say that I have the time to be a project manager, which is the function that Streamline is performing for us on this project, and be able to manage Geosyntac directly, but I don't have the time to do that. I've got, $35 million a year organization with 115 employees that I have to manage on a daily basis, as well as all the other stuff that goes along with, the best job I've ever had in my life. So that was the point of having Streamline LLC do the project management, be kind of the middleman for me, be that project engineer, project manager that I just don't have right now to do this. And he has a demonstrated history. Kurt knows the municipality, that he knows the system, he was a longtime employee here. He's an existing term contractor with the muni right now. It just makes sense, in my opinion.
Okay. Okay, good, thank you.
Yep. I'm going to ask to speak, if I might. I'm the original designer of everything.
I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have a public hearing at this time.
I know.
So
just asking from a professional, I designed everything.
So,
transfer station, we've been through.
My apologies, sir, but we don't have public hearing on this item.
All 30 seconds.
Ms. LaFrance.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I was wondering if I could ask Mr. Falsey if he might want to comment on the timing or what more we might expect from a work session. I know we had a work session on the technology, and I know one of the questions, and we're talking about postponing, but part of me feels like have so many folks assembled here, which isn't free to bring everyone here, that if we could get the most out of this discussion, that might be something we could try. But anyway, if Mr. Falsey, you wouldn't mind commenting, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
I'd be happy to. In that vein, I think we do have all of the experts and the relevant players in the room now. So if there are questions for the purchasing department, we have both the head of the purchasing department and his deputy live in person, Ron Haddon, on the phone. They could answer any of the questions about the term contract, which is competitively bid, or this sole source, which sort of derives from that initial effort. If there are questions about the technology, about what this product was going to tell us, those would be best directed to Mr. Spafford. I think we should maximize the utility of our time while we are all gathered here today.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson on the motion before us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I agree with Vice Chair LaFrance. I think since we drug all ourselves down here and we got a dozen or so city employees down here and a bunch of citizens to come down here to watch us make this decision, as long as we're here, let's do it. And And otherwise, we'll be extending the next meeting. And I know everybody says, oh, maybe it's a short agenda. I've seen the short agendas, and we're here till well after 11, so there's no guarantee we're going to get out of that meeting early. So let's just do it while we're here. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, members may proceed to vote. Ms. Kennedy, how do you vote on the motion to postpone?
Oh, wait.
Yes.
We are voting on the motion to postpone.
Wait, we're not going to.
That's the motion that's before us.
I'm sorry. So we were talking about having a broader discussion now. So do folks want to vote this down and not postpone it? Or, I mean, if we vote that, then the meeting's over.
No, it's not. We have the main motion before us after we vote on this motion.
If you'll have postponed it.
If you vote no, yeah.
But if we vote no, I'm saying, why did you call this question? Because if you vote no, now we can't do the same motion twice in a meeting. So if we vote no, we can't postpone it until December 3rd again. Why not withdraw this motion and let's keep talking? Because the substance of this.
I would be fine with that. The motion, no one suggested withdrawing the motion, so.
Well, point of question then.
Mr. Chair?
No, I mean, keep debating this motion, I'm saying. Keep debating this motion because the substance of this motion and the motion to postpone are basically the same thing. Let's just keep talking about this if we want to talk about it.
I mean, we could keep talking about postponing, but I think what the members are suggesting is that we actually talk about the item before us and not postponing.
Okay, but if we do that and we vote this down, we cannot then postpone it until December 3rd.
Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chair, I am not familiar with that rule.
I thought we tried.
Point of order.
When we did the
Point of order.
marijuana.
Hold on.
Yeah, what we could do is make a motion to reconsider, and then we could bring that question back before us, and we could vote to move it to December 3rd. So we have the parliamentary tactics we need.
Could you provide us a guide for it, please? Thank you. All right, so do you want a few minutes? Yeah. Okay, all right, we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break.
Good job. The assembly wasn't working.
right now?
As soon as as soon as I. All right. So, based on advice from our wonderful clerk, we can make a motion to approve on top of a motion to postpone if the intent is to debate the item before us.
Mr. Chair, move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Do you want to speak to that, Mr. Constant?
I think that we have assembled around us the professionals that can assist us in making this decision tonight, and that we can make this decision tonight.
Thank you. So, Mr. Dyson, on the motion before us, which is to approve this item.
I'm sorry, I thought we were still on the motion to postpone.
There was another motion made to approve, which the clerk advises is something that we can do.
All right, so if we vote yes, we're back to square one and the contract is approved, correct?
Correct.
And if we vote no, then we can entertain a motion to postpone.
So the clerk advises me that if it is a no vote, then the item fails and dies. So I think right now the point is let's do the work that we need, get the clarification that we need, and then after that clarification, if the body still decides that they want to postpone after we've asked all the questions, then we can make that decision. But right now, all we're doing is asking the clarifying questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate my colleague bringing up issues of process and transparency and competitive bid. And definitely we want to ensure that we're following process and are being transparent. I was wondering if Mr. Slivka or Mr. Slivka first perhaps would walk us through or address some of the issues of process and how can we ensure that we are compliant and transparent with what we have before us.
And I guess through the chair, what I would actually ask is the expert, Mr. Hayden, who we have with us, is Director of Purchasing and is the purchasing officer, the steps he follows in relation to Title VII. Ron?
Through the chair, this is Mr. Haddon. Do I have approval to speak?
Yes, Mr. Haddon.
The process that was followed to bring this particular issue to the Assembly was that when Solid Waste Services came forward and asked for approval for this to be put on a term contract, our term contracts normally limit the work to be performed to $50,000 increments because at that point in Title VII's $50,000 is the level on which we would go to a formal bid. So in my opinion, it was worthwhile to bring this particular $99,000 contract to the Assembly for approval and not run it through the term contract. And that was why it was a sole source to streamline. I can definitely appreciate Mr. Spafford's lack of staff and ability to project manage this, which was another reason that for the sole source, even though it wasn't stated on the document, for bringing it forward. And in accordance with Title VII, a sole source or non-competitive award, part of the rationale within Title VII is, as it was stated in the AM, does it reasonably limit the source to one company? And in my opinion, this particular action limited that, and that Streamline was the best firm available to meet the requirements of Solid Waste Services. That was the rationale for bringing it to the Assembly for your approval. Do I have any questions, or did I generate more questions with attempting to clarify the rationale?
Thank you, Mr. Haddon. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you. Actually, yes, Mr. Haddon, that definitely raised a question for me. You said it was reasonably limited to one company. So why is my question? Why Streamline AM LLC versus potentially others? And kind of a more fundamental question is, when I thought that the term contract was with AWU, not SWS. So I guess I need a point of clarification on that. And do we allow term contracts to go between multiple entities? Because this is my first time dealing with something coming out of a term contract like this.
Yes, ma'am. To answer your second question through the chair, we structure our term contracts so that any entity within the municipality can use those. So it's not unusual for solid waste services to look across the board of term contracts and say, which one of these is going to meet our needs? And then they discuss that with the applicable department, and if the applicable department is willing, then yes, a order can be written across department lines. And my rationale was Streamline was and is familiar with the subcontractor, is familiar with the project, and that we would save time and money by going with Streamline to manage this project for solid waste services. And I understand that's a debatable opinion, but it was mine, and that was why I'm standing by. Did I answer your questions, Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Haddon. Yes, I have a question for Mr. Spafford next. So my question there is, Mr. Spafford, I understand from Mr. Slivka that there will be more go, no-go decision points about waste to energy, but that's not what I gathered from your statement to Mr. Dunbar, that it was we're going toward waste to energy. How we go to waste to energy is what all those things that you detailed we needed to find out. Can you provide me some clarification or how I might have two different understandings?
Yep. Yes, through the chair. So the pre-feasibility study told us that the best waste-to-energy technology for us is a mass burn incinerator. And so the implementation plan is going to tell us what we need to do, what we're going to have to do to get to that point. And so it'll tell us all the steps that we need to take in order to get to the point where we're going to design and construct a mass burn incinerator. And so with that plan, what that will tell us is that it's going to cost us X amount of dollars, it's going to take us X amount of time, it's going to take us, here's the steps that we need to take and all the different things that we need to do. We put that back in front of the assembly. My vision is that we have lots of work sessions to talk about it because it is such a huge undertaking, and we decide, the assembly decides what you want me to do as far as moving forward with the project. And that'll be the go, no go. Because it'll be like, okay, well, it's going to take us $10 million, and I'm just pulling that number out there, right? $10 million for us to get to the point where we can put out an RFQ package for somebody to design, build, and operate a plant like this for us.
Mr. Chair, may I ask one more follow-up? So I reread the Geosyntec report and the recommendations for future steps. There's 4 or 5 very specific things they recommend in terms of like studying the waste flow, regulatory, and those types of things. Is that what you're expecting to come out of this project or something else? Because construction implementation, I think, is a misnomer. So can you talk about the scope of work you're expecting?
Yeah, through the chair. It's exactly what you just said. It's gonna help us to define those next steps that are in that report.
So why in 90 days? Because this is pretty comprehensive what Geosyntec recommends. I mean, it's a lot of work, and we would want that information to be quite comprehensive. One of the concerns I have about this is not only the sole source nature, but the time that it's expected to happen in 90 days is that we're going to end up with change orders back before us or something else, because I don't see how this is possible.
Those are, through the chair, those are valid concerns. That's a great question. However, I've had this discussion with Geosyntec and Streamline quite a bit. That's the time frame that they said that they could get this work done in. I mean, they've done this type of work before. It's not something that's new to them. And in my opinion, the sooner and quicker that we can get stuff done, the better.
And one last one, Mr. Chair. What have we done, if we're headed down this path with this contractor, perhaps this subcontractor again, to see if there are other differing viewpoints about this, that when we have one report from one viewpoint, what are we doing to kind of check that? Because if they're subject matter experts, they can't be the only opinion out there.
Through the chair, I have meetings set up with a couple of different larger engineering firms to talk about just this type of question about what is the best way to implement a project like this. And so we are talking to other individuals and other firms out there. However, it makes sense from the development of the implementation plan to have someone that's already familiar with our project and our scenario or our situation here in Anchorage, and not have to, spend a month or two trying to get somebody else spun up. And so that was the rationale about using the term contractor, which in turn, of course, like we just heard Mr. Haddon say, the best way that we could do this right now was a sole source, and it met the requirements of Title VII.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I would note that the project that was operated for us for the port analysis was roughly 90 days and about the same scale, a little bit less cost, but certainly the production was very high in terms of content. And Mark, I have a question for you though. Will this analysis at all offer us any kind of preliminary environmental kind of analysis so that we can see answers to the questions that were raised? And would it also, as I think Ms. Zeletel stated, offer alternatives in its conclusions that might be, things that we need to look at as we move closer to a go, no go?
Through the chair, that's another great question. Yes, it will.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Hey, Mark? Yeah. Please, Mr. Chair, allow me a little flexibility here. I'm probably the biggest fan of that project, but what you just said disturbed me. You said the results of this work will tell you the next steps. When I read the words or hear the words feasibility, it is analysis of the feasibility of the project. Now, is my definition of feasibility right, or is your description of what you expect correct? Because they seem to differ.
Through the chair, I'm sorry, Mr. Dyson, can you ask that question again?
Yeah, you said that this is going to tell you the next steps. We want the results of a very good feasibility study that will do their best at estimating costs, but will talk about the risks. And certainly what you're trying to do here is incinerate the waste from a good part of South Central, solve their problems. What's the risk of those not joining us, and what does that do to the project's possibility? What about fuel prices? No one, including Exxon, has done really well at predicting fuel prices and demand in the last couple of decades. What about that? And then Mr. Constant raised the environmental issue, but far greater risk to this project is the capricious acts of government in changing regulations and so on and so forth. So there's three things I can think about, and so on. Is this study going to give us not only the best estimates, but the risk factors in each one of those unknowns going forward? So we will have, and you will have, very good data on which to make a reasoned decision.
Through the chair, yes, Mr. Dyson. So the pre-feasibility study told us that a mass burn incinerator was the best waste to energy, was the recommended waste to energy choice for our community. The implementation plan is going to tell us all of the different topics all the different
items that we're going to need to do. One of those is going to be, the air quality permitting. And so there's going to be a discussion in there about these are all of, the issues that are going to be associated with air quality permitting. Here's how much it's going to take. Here's how long it's going to take. And so it's going to have each one of those steps that we're going to need to take and be successful at in order to develop a project like this. And so, I'm not going to kid anybody here. Like any one of those things, including, the will of this body here, can pull the rug out from underneath it at, any point in time. So it's not going to be an easy project to develop, and there's just a lot of hurdles that are going to have to be overcome.
Yeah,
including like making sure that we get the Mat-Su Borough on board, and making sure that we still have a willing partner in AWU to be a customer to a plant like that.
Yeah, so if I was you making this presentation, I would say the results of this study will give us all the data and the risk factors that will enable us to make a very best decision we can 4 or 5 months from now. But so in what you said about them telling you the next best steps, does it include the risk factor in those pieces of data that you have to be in place in order for this to be a viable project?
Through the chair, yes, it will. Yes.
Good. I'm a great coach, right? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
You can stay up there, Mark. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was reading through an email thread this afternoon, and there seems to be an interest in the possibility of selling alternative energy fuel, aviation fuel, to airlines or an airline. And is that something that is going to be considered in this study? And could we produce both electricity and airline fuel?
Through the chair, I don't know anything about that technology, and I know some other people probably in this room right now would probably disagree with me on the feasibility of that technology. But one of the main tenets of the pre-feasibility study that we did was looking at solutions that were not only reliable but also had a long history of demonstrated success. And so because of those factors, that's why we landed on a mass burn incinerator, because there's literally thousands of those plants across in the world that are operating successfully versus, and I'm new to the jet fuel from solid waste technology. I've never heard of it, and so I'm not really familiar with that. So I can't speak on it intelligently right now anyway. But as far as the technologies are concerned, we've completed that step. But as someone who likes new and innovative ideas, I've got information on who to reach out to and contact about that particular technology, and it's something I'm going to do here when I have the time.
All right, and if I could follow up.
Sure.
And also in that same email thread, they were talking about the price that we'd be able to sell this electricity for, and was that in the same range as what we had seen in our presentation earlier, of somewhere, I think they were saying between 2 and 6 cents a kilowatt hour?
Through the chair, I believe we're looking at 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour, I believe, is what we started with in the economic pro forma that was part of the pre-feasibility study.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would urge a yes vote on this item tonight for 2 reasons. And one, per the handout that we were given with the notes and questions, tonight's agenda item, on the back where it says November 2018, Assembly approves integrated solid waste master plan, which included a recommendation to study waste to energy. The Assembly made many positive remarks in this area, which directed the municipality of Anchorage to conduct a feasibility study. I remember when we did that and we gave that direction. And 2, from the discussion tonight and from what I've seen, this sole source contract is in line with Title VII and the process is lawful. And the deliverable will give us information so that we can determine what are the next appropriate steps, if any, with moving forward with this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would urge a no vote and that this should go out for RFP. A request for proposal would get us those other additional viewpoints that Mr. Spafford said that he's going to go and check on anyway with other engineers. I think while the Assembly has previously said that waste to energy makes great sense, how we go about it and what road we take to get there should be an open and very public process. And I quite honestly disagree with the purchasing officer's determination that this is reasonably limited to one source for supplier to do this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. I have, in my role as with the audit committee, had some conversations with Mr. Haddon, and I'm impressed. He seems to be a very experienced and well thought of guy, and his saying that exceeding the 50,000 limit on sole sources on an exception basis is reasonable in this case. And some of you, just because of your profession, are used to and being around professional services contracts, and they are significantly different than when you're buying products on price or a particular service. There, you got measurable outputs and deadlines and so on. And for all of you, all of us who are struggle with cynicism, it's well based in our day, and there's a large data set to say be suspicious of motives. But indeed, most consultants, and I don't know these people at all, but they operate on a professional reputation of being fair and straightforward, in in doing their job. And they, in a profession, because you're generally restricted from advertising, just with professional ethics, then it is your reputation and your production on which you attract new clients. And so I'm going to support this going forward, and particularly in project management, you've got to measure several things, and time is an important issue. And I've become a little bit of a fan of this administration on a couple of three things. One is they put some darn good people in place. Secondly, they're stepping back and looking at big picture things, unlike any administration I'm familiar working with. The fire road access, the drainage utility, and looking forward to solving our significant issues with solid waste, or big picture things that this administration is taking on, and my hat's off to them. I've got some other things I'd be critical about, but those things they deserve our respect and appreciation for. You heard me ask, in my typical ignorance, how much longer this was going to extend our solid waste site. I thought 3 times as long. I understood you to tell me 30 times as long.
130 more years.
Wow. Yeah, so those are profound things. We, like some other cities in the West Coast, San Francisco particularly, are real estate limited. And space here is beginning to be tough and is going to get tougher. This kind of a prolonging of the efficiency of the usefulness of this is an extraordinary feature. So I'd encourage you to, I think, avoiding sole source contracts is a good thing, particularly on measurable quantifications. I encourage you to not be unduly concerned about when a professional service contract ends up that way. And these people apparently have done well for us in the past. So anyways, I'm going to vote in favor of this next feasibility study. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
I think I'm done, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was wondering if we could hear the information that the gentleman in the blue shirt was going to present to us a few minutes ago, just so we can hear everything before we make our final decision.
Sure, we can do that if you'd like.
If he would like to talk about it.
Yes, yeah, we'll put on 3 minutes.
I just had a tooth removed today, so I'm just getting over anesthesia and everything else. Try to make this quick. I'm the original designer of...
Sorry, if you could give us your name, please.
Albert L. Swank, pretty well, everybody knows me. Albert L. Swank, Jr. Okay, I'm the owner of Langdon Engineering. I'm the original designer of the transfer station. It was originally a solid waste shredding facility. So it's a shredding facility, the land deal for it, redesigning it to the transfer station, the regional landfill, and I can go on and on. There were 3 of us. That company was Arctic Environmental Engineers. Joe Grunwald was the director of solid waste services at that time. Plain and simple. The questions that, I'm sorry, Zoleta? I don't know your first name, that she brought up and whatnot, and we're going to run out of time. I would appreciate if somebody would let me extend. It'll just take a few minutes. Are very true. Number 1, and what solid waste has presented and whatnot, they've already told you. They have the resources, et cetera, da. This is just going to be another project that gets pushed forward, and the number 1 most critical issue, we looked at all of this, I can tell you that. We did this, first it was a shredder to extend the Merrifield landfill. We needed life out of it. So we did. We extended it on and on. We looked at the combustion. And yes, there's a lot of choices out there. But number 1, what do they involve? More so than anything, economics. Economics all the way around. Yes, you can waste money. You can go in the hole deeper very easily. Yes, there are many large cities that do it under different economic situations. They don't have, anyway, I got to make this shorter. But all of that. Now, what needs to happen with this, sole source issue and whatnot, the particular, as I understand it, that I did research, tried to find the company and whatnot. This particular company, as I understand it, has the treatment facility incinerator. Very limited, very narrow, on and on. To give them a sole source contract to go through all the parameters that are involved in this and not create another economic nightmare for this city. And there are many solutions to the solid waste, including renegotiating. We also negotiated the federal government land swap for the regional landfill. I can go on and on. But what needs to happen is an RFP does need to be issued. And most critical is writing the scope of work for that RFP contract to address the different issues, that have been addressed and many others, the economics, the options, and that has not been done. And with it then goes the project management proceeding forward.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Anybody else have any more specific questions?
I don't see anyone in the queue.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further discussion, members may proceed. Oh, yes, Ms. Kennedy.
Mr. Rivera, thank you. Actually, I'm going to oppose this simply, well, not simply, for a couple of reasons. One is I initially opposed this when it was first brought up at our last meeting, mostly because it is a very large sole source contract, and I was getting the impression that we weren't really sure exactly what we were asking for in this particular study, and I think that has actually become even more apparent. So for 2 reasons then, I'm going to oppose this. One is I think it's better public to have the opportunity for more people to be involved, particularly putting it out to bid and getting more perspectives from different people that might have other answers and other potential ways to go about doing this that we haven't even had the opportunity to really hear from. The other thing that I think is important is that we do probably need a better scope of work. I think it was pretty apparent that there was a lot of different understandings or misunderstandings about what this what the study would actually do. And I think just in listening to some of the conversations brought up here tonight and seeing some of the information coming back and forth through the emails, that maybe we're beginning to get to a place where we have a little better scope of work and we know more specifically about what we really should be looking into for this study. So I would think that if we were to send this back and put out an RFP, we would actually have a better structure so that we can get better information in regard to what this study tells us. I mean, the idea of really having a feasibility study, I think, is number one. You know, what really is the question that we're asking? And I'm thinking that first question needs to be, is this project even feasible? Not necessarily how we do this project or how we start this project, but let's figure out first if it's even the right kind of project for our municipality. So anyway, I would like to see it go back to that RFP, be a better developed study request, and let's actually do a little bit better at providing the public process needed, especially to the tune of $100,000. So I will be a no vote and hope that we can go back and make this whole thing a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. Could I ask a question, Mr. Spafford? Are you still here behind that thing? All right. So kind of what Mr. Swank said, and then follow up on Assemblywoman Kennedy's comments to it. So that's the original study. Do you feel that addressed? There were other options. Those were decided they weren't as good as waste to energy, so we looked at waste to energy, and that says it's feasible? Because we're getting questions here that this next study should show its feasibility and analyze other options.
Yes, through the chair, Mr. Welton, that's what the pre-feasibility study did, is it evaluated the different waste, the different waste to energy technologies that are available on the market, and mass burn was the one that was recommended as part of that report.
Okay, but there were other ways to deal with it too. One is, I don't know if we'll never get land from J-Bear. I think that was kind of our backup plan forever. Maybe that's one. Another one, we hear from someone we could do jet fuel. I don't know anything about that either. But was there a study that looked at whatever imaginable other options there are?
That was, through the chair, that was the pre-feasibility study.
Okay, so
that was part of that.
So
yes.
Questions now looking for that to be done with this study is kind of like, wait, been there, done that, we're moving forward. Is that how you view it?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. So were we to vote against this and say we want it done through an RFP, another study or kind of purchasing process with an RFP, it sounds like the questions that some would have us ask would be different than the final 4 questions of the feasibility study. So what's the process for that? Do we send you a list of questions and say, make sure this study answers these? Or typically we don't do that, I think.
Through the chair, I'm not following the question.
Well, I think what we're hearing here is that there's expectations of this study to answer questions that you feel were already answered. So if we said, okay, we vote this down and we say, go do it through the normal RFP competitive bid process, we'll tell you what questions to ask, is kind of my sense. Well, I mean, Crystal had some questions that would not be answered by the current proposal, right?
Through the chair, what we would, if we did that, if we went to an RFP process, we would basically just ask someone to prepare an implementation plan that we've already asked Streamline to prepare a scope of work for.
Okay.
It would be an implementation plan for, the development of a mass burn incinerator waste to energy project.
Okay. But what I'm hearing is, at least from Crystal and Mr. Swank, for example, there's questions that, wait, we need to look at other alternatives. And your sense is we've done that and we're moving on.
Through the chair, correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
At the risk of recognizing Mr. Dyson's in the queue, I was going to say that his wisdom is clear and true, and I'm going to vote the way he has recommended, and I think it's the wise path today.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, so bothers me when you say an implementation plan as opposed to a feasibility study. And Mr. Slank's point of view is, he said better than I did, it's the economics. And does this thing pencil out? And that bothers me. Mr. Weldon, being the most experienced business person amongst us, I think, keeps talking about that. And I will be very disappointed if the result of this doesn't tell us very clearly what are the assumptions that went on it, i.e. Kenai and Matsu helping with the capital costs and an income stream in the future, how competitive our energy will be in the market in the future, and the, as I said before, the capricious acts of government. So, back in my role as coach, if this thing doesn't produce that kind of information, I suggest you delay it until I'm out of office. Because I'll be very, very disappointed. And so I think you're still confused about this as an implementation program of how to go forward, as opposed to a feasibility study that shows us the economics of it and the risk factors therein. So, yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slivka.
Yes, through the chair. So I just want to remind everybody, and I think it was handled earlier, that the pre-feasibility study did identify that this did seem to be economically feasible, in that the cost that that people would have to pay, it parallels what people currently pay for waste. So it was based on the pre-feasibility with the mass burn that it seemed like it would make sense to go to the next step and say, okay, what steps would we have to take in order to do this? But to answer the very specific question, we've done the pre-feasibility work to say, would it pencil? And when you take the work that does in conjunction with the fact that AWU is about to lose their incinerator, and that would be a $100 million project all on its own, all those things came together and said, okay, let's go do a study to see what would the next steps be. And I think we've said many times there's going to be many go, no-go decisions with lots of public input about what this looks like and what it will accomplish, and it won't go forward at all unless it is economically viable, and that means that there will be long-term contracts in place with Matsu, with AWU, with whoever, so that we can actually move forward and build it. But this will never happen unless it's economically positive.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to use Mr. Dyson's word, confusion. And I think this has actually gotten even more confusing. And so it bothers me to think that there are some of us who are thinking this study does one thing and some of us who are thinking it does another. There are some of us who think it's not doing something, and others that think it's not doing something else. So I don't know if somebody wants to really summarize what this $99,000 is all about, or if people just feel like they already know how they want to vote and we're done. But again, I have found all of this to be very confusing, and it seems like the more people try to explain it and talk about it, the more confusing that they even sound. So I'm kind of at a loss right here, but I guess my gut feeling tells me that this could use some more time. And so I'm still a no vote unless somebody can really summarize this in such a way that makes a little more sense. Thank you.
Thank you. So are you asking for someone from the administration to do so? Ms. Kennedy?
I'm sorry, Mr. Rivera, was that question to me? I was in between muting and...
Yes. So are you asking someone from the administration to respond?
I think if somebody wants to kind of hit the highlights on this and try to make sense and clarify exactly what this is for and what kind of a track we're on with this project, that would be helpful.
Got it.
Because again, it seems like we go back and forth about what we think somebody said and what we think this contract is really about, and then somebody seems to refute it, and I would like to see where we're really landing on all of this before I vote. So thank you.
Thank you. So with that, does someone from the administration want to respond?
Certainly. Again, Alex Slivka. So I think where we are, and it got highlighted before, what's before us is an implementation plan that is basically the third step in what has been a year-long process when this body approved the long-term master plan for solid waste a year ago. It included waste to energy, at which point there was many positive comments from the Assembly about that, and that led us to take the first step to do the pre-feasibility study to see if it even made sense. And that pre-feasibility study clearly outlined, as Mr. Spafford has said, a number of different alternatives and which one would have the highest probability of success and also would be the most economic. And as Marcus said, that is mass burn, and based on that report, which was presented to the utility committee of this assembly body said, yes, please move forward with the next step, which would be an implementation plan. And so, as Mr. Spafford has said, this contract is both project management through Slipstream as well as the implementation plan work itself, which they would continue to do with Geosyntec. So I think before us, it's this next step where we'll come back to you and say, these are the steps that would need to be taken in order for us to pursue a waste-to-energy plan. And if it's not economic, it will not go forward.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
I guess I'll step out for now.
Thank you. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you. So I got back to the Geosyntec, pre-feasibility report, and it outlines what needs to be done next, and it's not implementation. We need a detailed regulatory, environmental, and social impact studies, engineering and technical review of potential sites for a waste-to-energy facility, waste collection and transportation studies, a detailed implementation timeline, including procurement, financing, permitting activities, and further refining of the pro forma model. This should be summarized into a formal feasibility report for the client's use. To me, that is a lot of different things requiring different levels of expertise that we haven't been talked to about necessarily, and that aren't necessarily held with one entity. And it seems like all of those studies, regulatory, environmental, social, engineering, geotechnical, need to happen before the actual detailed implementation timeline. So I feel like we're cart before the horse here until we get this feasibility study, which I really do think is best suited for RFP. Thank you.
Thank you.
So through the chair, Ms. Saltel, I think we're just getting the semantics of the wording mixed up. I mean, from what you just said in the report, we may have just put implementation where we should have put feasibility. Using those terms that are in the sole source or in the work that was done, the feasibility study will tell us all those things that you listed. It'll have summaries of like what we're going to need to do with each one of those. Like you're going to need to do a waste characterization study that's going to cost $500,000, and you'll have to do an RFP for that. You'll need to do a full economic analysis that includes all of the different partners from the neighboring utilities that you've gotten agreements with, and it's going to take this long, and you're going to have to hire this type of person to do that. So I think we're just getting wrapped around the axles about implementation versus feasibility. And if you want to call it a feasibility report, and that'll help to clear up everything, and it's not as definitive as like we're going to implement a waste to energy plant, we're more than happy to do that, because saying it like that, I mean, that makes sense to me about how you could get confused, and so I apologize for that.
Mr. Chair, may I? Yes, I mean, we are given what we're given, and the AAM says to produce an implementation plan for the construction of a waste-to-energy facility. So words matter. It's what we're given. It's what our analysis goes off of. And so I just want to raise that if what we're really talking about is something else, then that's what the AM needs to say, because we need a very clear record. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Oh, Mark, don't go too far, and I think you asked this question already. I mean, your intent is to follow up what the pre-feasibility study said to do, is that right, in the points that Meg just read?
Through the chair, exactly, yes,
And that's
correct.
what this is to do.
Correct.
You just didn't write it up quite as cleanly as that would have been.
In my little engineering brain, that made sense to me, but, obviously I live in I'm in a different world over there, so I apologize for that.
What is, and reading it, I mean, you have points in here, I mean, you'd have to, there are bits of information you would get from this study that really are, you would go to study what will you get from interlocal agreements, well, and what would be required, and that speaks to a more precise pro forma. It may be something that wasn't anticipated. Procurement of equipment, I mean, that speaks to an item that was in that list. And what does it cost to get the stuff, right? And that'll fine-tune your knowledge of that. So we'll get dollars and cents as we move forward and see if your 400-something million is higher or lower, right?
Through the chair, that's correct, yes. That's what this feasibility study will tell us, is that it'll give us it'll tell us exactly what we're going to need to do and how much it's going to cost. And what the different trip-up points are and whether or not it's going to be economically feasible, and give all of us that transparent, in front of us information. We can talk about it and beat it up all day and decide what we want to do next.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. So I think we're about ready to vote. So Mr. Peterson, and then Lycos to vote.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, if it would make members feel better, maybe we could amend this to say, instead of implementation plan, a feasibility study, or a cost-benefit analysis. Call it whatever you want.
Because I have that motion prepared, it would be to add,
Gee, great minds think alike.
yeah, my computer turned off. Hold on a sec.
Can you change the title?
I'll turn my mic off so you can make that motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
The new motion, how about a public hearing?
It would be a motion to amend line number 9 to add the words feasibility study after implementation plan.
So and feasibility study?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. So there is just some general question on whether this is something we can do. Can we just clarify that? Yes. Okay. I think it was Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah.
Was the second? Yeah.
Yep.
Any discussion on that?
Just briefly, there's a question about is it proper to amend the mayor's memorandum? And I've discussed it with the mayor. I don't believe there's objection. And so with that, I think that there isn't a question. If we, a majority, agree that this is proper, it's proper.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing no discussion, members may proceed to vote.
Chair?
Yes, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. I guess for me, that even gets more confusing because my understanding is the feasibility study has already been done. So are we going to call this feasibility study B or, anyway, I guess, like I said, there's still more confusion that seems to be adding to the conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. I think to clarify, there was a pre-feasibility study done, and I think Mr. Spafford can explain more about that if you would like. Ms. Salatel on the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We would need, it actually says to Ms. Kennedy's point on line 12, has already completed a feasibility study. We need internal consistency in the document if we're going to do that.
Yeah, if I might amend the amendment to add the word pre before that, because as we have all understood, it was a pre-feasibility study. I think it's just a little.
Thank you. Does the second agree?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so now there are two parts to this amendment. So amending line 9, implementation plan and feasibility study, and amending line 12, pre-feasibility study. Seeing no further discussion on that, members may proceed to vote. Ms. Kennedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Perez-Padilla? I thought she was a yes.
She said yes.
Yeah, she did say yes. So that passes 11-0. The clerk is fixing that, yeah. So now we have the main motion before us as amended. Seeing no further discussion on the main motion, members may proceed to vote. Ms. Kennedy, how do you vote?
I will vote yes.
That item passes 9-2. Oh, she did say yes. Ms. Kennedy, how did you vote on the main motion?
On the main motion, I voted yes.
Yeah, so, sorry, it's a little bit mumbly on our side, so that was a yes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we are now down to assembly comments. I'll start on this side with Mr. Weddleton.
Well, thanks. You know, I appreciate Meg bringing this up. I think they're important points, and I think we've clarified a lot here. One thing that is stunning to me is this is a pretty in-depth study that follows another one that was a couple $100,000. So we're probably $350,000 into studies by the time this is done, and we're pretty far along our way to saying how we're going to do this thing. And I compare that with what we're told is going to be $1.5 million study to do a stormwater utility, which is not a whole lot bigger than this. I'm puzzled by that, but I say we get streamlined to do all our studies at AWU.
Thank you. Ms. Zalatel.
No comment, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
No comment.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate a lot of the comments and having this conversation again, and I particularly appreciate the way Mrs. Zalatel is very successful to find out a lot of this information and try to clarify a lot of things. And I will just say that as a rule, I don't really care for sole source contracting. I think it's always better to involve the community as much as possible. I think it helps bring out a better product in the end with a lot of other potential input and comments that go along with that process, and I think we missed that on this one. The only reason why I really did support this was because I think there will be a lot of go and no-go opportunities that I think will be important. So I fully expect that there will be continued opportunity for public process in whatever direction we end up going with once this is formulated to a little bit more toward being constructed, if that is the case. But anyway, I just recognize the fact that we really need to make sure that we protect public process as much as we can. So hopefully we'll do that better in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to remind people we do have an Ethics and Election Committee meeting from noon to 2 tomorrow in room 155. We've got a lot of things we need to go over, and pizza and a salad will be ordered, so we're going to have lunch, so if nothing else, that's a good reason to attend. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I would just note that somehow the agenda got out of order, and we have still audience participation after. Usually it's before, and I'm not sure why that flipped, but it would be better in the future to flip it back.
Sorry, after what?
Usually assembly comments close the meeting.
Isn't it not? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Nothing, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
No comment, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
I want to echo the comments of the Vice Chair and encourage you all to be thankful. And whether you believe in God or not, thank whoever for the blessings in your life, and I think particularly of people and friends and family and so on. There's some evidence that having a peaceful and thankful heart releases serotonin into your bloodstream and brings peace and some joy. If you don't have any of that, I guess there are street vendors out here with some artificial substitutions, but I encourage us all to count our blessings, and thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll go ahead and open up audience participation. Welcome.
Ron Oliva, I'm coming to your house, Fred, because not much to be thankful for being here. And part of my concern is I listened, and this meeting lasted longer, over 100,000, versus Mr. Dunbar keeps growing with 5.2. And I want to compare the purchase of my property by inverse condemnation versus adverse possession or eminent domain. The Christian Health, I'm not getting good feelings there to be thankful about that. I transcribed the meeting, and I went back and I kept reading the words. Horrible by Mr. Rivera. Confusing over there, Ms. Zanatel, let's do the mathematics. Mr. Wellington does it, and it just keeps growing out of hand, and you had a work session to study all this. Very scary, very scary. But then, no one invited me to the work session because the money went to a project that's not even funded, that was supposed to be funded by the state 20 years ago. There's no money. And you bought a Christian Health Associates. So there was no crisis with them, but down where I'm at, I have a homeless crisis. You sent me 160 more people, and I discovered the needle exchange van goes there twice a week. And at the Federation, I asked the 4As, how many needles are distributed and exchanged in Anchorage in a year? Over 1 million. Includes diabetics, but hey, diabetics don't go to AIDS to get their needles. So then you got into this, you didn't even address the crisis, and Mr. Dunbar's chasing down something that's not going to happen. And it scares me because there's more votes with that nonprofit and charity than there is with me. And I'd like Mr. Dunbar to recluse himself from anything to do with the Leyva family. I think we have a little conflict there, and I'd like him to disclose it to the chairman. The other thing is, they not only bought the property, they moved the entire industry, whatever it was, and then they renovated the building, and they didn't cap it. It's not capped yet. Mr. Dunbar says we're negotiating with ourselves. Well, the verbiage is insane. Why would you do that? So you not only do all this, you didn't study it. You know, all these loose ends by Mrs. Kennedy, what's going to happen with the 14,000 cars? It turns out they have to do a study on my property before they'll buy it.
Thank you, Mr. Oliva.
Okay, I want to sum up. There's no lawsuit with the health people.
Thank you.
I got a new lawsuit coming down the pike. Does anyone have a question? Mr. Constant asked me a question, what happened this weekend?
I don't have a question, but I want to say I agree with you that it is a problem that you continue not to be made whole when the crisis is real and surrounding it.
Well, no, I'm going to expect triple because that Christian group got triple. I'm just as good as them, and I'm a taxpayer. Hey, no security guard, so I can keep going.
Mr. Oliva, I have other people who would like to participate, please.
Hey, oh no! Here he is. Oh, darn it. Well, listen, it didn't get so out, and I'd like to go and invite you all to join us at Mr. Dyson's house to be thankful.
Thank you.
Because what happened last night, or
Mr.
during
Oliva,
that
your
thing,
time is up.
was
Thank you.
shameful.
Would anyone else like to participate?
Yes, my name is Tom Lockish. I'm the author of that email chain regarding biojet fuel as an alternative that I've been trying to get the administration to address for 4 years. It's clear that the preliminary assessment did not evaluate those technologies that have been in use outside of London and in Oregon and in Nevada for some time. And there apparently was an ethical issue that should be addressed by the Ethics Committee regarding the price of the energy that is supposedly being garnered from the waste-to-energy facility at 6.5 cents, when a Chugach board member has informed me that, in fact, you will only get the avoided cost now, and apparently that 6.5 cents was adopted by the utility committee when you had a utility and not prior to the Chugach purchase, which you now have to abide by their external generation purchase agreement, which is only paying an avoided cost fee. So now if your study that you're basing this choice of waste to energy on is fraudulent, using an inappropriate cost return more than three times what you're likely to get when there's extra additional space available on your CCGTs, then I think you have an ethics issue that you should address here. And if Mr. Peterson would be so kind as to provide the location of your ethics meeting tomorrow, I'd like to attend and make a complaint.
It's at room 155, City Hall. And we have an amazingly full agenda already, so I'm not sure we're going to have time to get you in. You can make a comment at the end, and that's about. I mean, we extended the meeting from an hour to 2 hours, and then two extra items got added by the Ethics Committee already today. So.
Well, as long as I could get the necessary information from Mr. Spofford and your contractor regarding the cost analysis for selection of the waste to energy and the means to address your committee, that would likely be sufficient. It'll probably take me a week or so to write up the complaint in any event.
Maybe that information is available from the Finance Department.
Mr. Slivka, is that going to be available? Is that information going to be available?
So, sir,
I'll take it offline.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. If we could just, no, thanks. Welcome.
I think I'm entitled to 3 more minutes because that was called by Mr. Peterson. Okay.
Yeah, have you on 3 minutes.
Anyway, back to this, the waste to energy. The contractual, whatever the contract.
Don't we need to
sorry, sir, can you say your name again?
Oh, I'm sorry. Albert Swank.
Thank you.
Langdon Engineering. Okay, back to the issue. The existing document that was written is same problems exist in city government, federal governments, everything. Contract officers do not know what they are writing. They do not have the technical expertise. End of story. They know contractual procedures, the legal law associated with it, etc. Technically, no, they can't know it all. They rely upon somebody within the organization preparing that outline. And so if they don't have that person, again, who has, like in this case, the engineering background, the economic background, the permitting background, then they have to find that person to write that scope. And so I've never saw the scope. That's such an undefined scope, it's nowheresville. And that's why all this conversation happened. That is and then now you have this arbitrarily dollar amount issued by the contractor performing the incinerator, as I understand it, the incinerator for the sludge facility at the Asplund treatment, which we also designed. I can go on and on. That whole issue is no different than how your port project is going and the way those contracts are being handled. So, again, as this goes forward now, it is critical to get the entire scope, which lists every single item that you want and needs to be in there, as well as technically. If you hire, you can even go out for an RFP or a consultant with the expertise to prepare that. It is not untypical. AWWU does it with reference to their design of their water lines, etc. The same thing when they design the Asplund treatment plant. Some of your departments have that expertise, Others do not. So you need to get that and prepare those scopes specifically, listing everything. And then you will get a proper response with a proper cost to it, et cetera. And if you don't, and the other choice is to hire a project manager to do that for you. And I'll stop. The biggest problem I have seen in this administration is contractually.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Would anyone else like to participate? Welcome.
I am Russ Reno. I own a business downtown Anchorage, and I'm a resident downtown Anchorage. To the chair, I'd like to say that I apologize for my outburst last meeting here that were out of order, and I won't let that happen again. I was very disappointed in the fact that I brought some numbers to this body, and you guys really impressed me because you addressed them immediately to the administration and to address some of those numbers, and then my representative was able to cobalt the whole thing, and I never got to ever hear anything from them by breaking in and talking about something that was unrelated and was not true. So I'd like to give you some more numbers that I found out today. I know I've sent this to all of you, but just in case, maybe someone has not heard yet. In downtown Anchorage, and I'm very careful about this, from 9th and A Street is where I put the centerpiece and then drew one circle, 1 mile in any direction. We have had 45% more death investigations in just the month of October, 67% more sexual offenses in just the month of October. Now, this is all compared to Eagle River, Anchorage, and Girdwood. We've had 33% more robbery. We've had 30% more aggressive assault, 42% assault in general, 43% more burglaries, 46% more theft, 32% more fraud, 57% in a 1 mile radius of vehicle thefts. This is in the whole city. 75% arsons, DUIs 35%, drugs 27%, disorderly conduct 50%, vandalism 49%, trespass 45%. We have 42% more of the crime in Anchorage, Eagle River, and in Girdwood than anywhere else in the city. And if I recall, I believe that the municipality of Anchorage is 1,450 square miles. So I think that's something that we should address. We don't have full-time police officers downtown. We can't get them to pass over from the north side of 3rd Avenue. We're getting ignored because we cannot, my vote does not, I voted for both Mr. Constant and Mayor Berkowitz, but my vote really doesn't count because all their constituents that are actually going to vote for them, none of them live downtown Anchorage. So I have no representation downtown Anchorage for myself as a resident because it's mostly businesses. And as long as they say things nice to the Anchorage Downtown Partnership, to the coalition, to all these other business groups, the residents don't have a voice. And we really need to have a voice. It's blatantly obvious, unless these numbers are wrong, it's blatantly obvious that the 42% of our actual crime is in 1 mile radius of downtown. Why not put the police there? Why not? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Reno, I owe you a follow-up, and I just got this, I think, today, and I was busy with the reason we're here today, but there's some numbers from the Deputy Chief of Police I'm going to forward to you that are a half mile around your address, and they're a little bit different. And we're having, it's not just you, there's a community council where when we look at these crime statistics, they can get taken a little bit out of context. So I want to have that conversation with you. So I owe you an email, but I can give you really quickly, like assaults were 12 for a month period, burglary 3, stolen vehicle 3, strong arm robbery 1, and theft 9. I'll send these to you and we'll continue the conversation. Thank you.
May I follow up one thing though? Most of that's Cook Inlet, 1.5 mile from my house.
Well, I'll send the email and we can have a further discussion.
Mr. Weddleton.
I have a question for the mayor. Do you direct the police to only go where the most votes are?
I do not direct the police. I think it's a very dangerous precedent for civilian authority to direct the police.
Thanks.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to participate? Welcome.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I represent myself. I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more like the public interest. I live in the Mat-Su Valley. Number one, the item that you had tonight, the one item, was a reconsideration of a issue that was placed on the agenda of the previous meeting. On the consent agenda, which there was no public comment opportunity for a verbal comment. The same scenario occurred here when you made a decision on that same item, but where was a public comment? Yes, you allowed one person who you wanted to hear from the audience to come up that was a member of the public, but it dominated from the administration and other players on the issue, and the public was not engaged. You can't go and say, we'll receive emails from different members of the public on their concerns. Well, we'd like to see those comments too. It's hidden among you all. So with all due respect, remember my words I've said frequently, the more complex and complicated issue is, the more notice, the more opportunity for the public to be heard. Now I'll close with this comment, and you can almost guess what that is. School board meetings. November there were 2, the same time the regular meetings of the Assembly. Next meeting, the next meeting you have, a regular meeting, will be number 3 in a row. July, I warned you before they started changing the schedule to Tuesday nights in conflict with you all. And the end result is you have conducted policy of indifference. I know you deal with a lot of complicated issues, but changing the date, changing a schedule so it's not in conflict with school board meetings shouldn't be a complicated issue. But you made it so, but public knows it's not complicated, and you cannot deal with that issue appropriately, which you've shown in July, August, September, October, November, and now we're moving in December. With all due respect, how can they have confidence in decisions you make on any other issue when you cannot even deal with a simple thing of changing the date so the public doesn't have to decide whether to go to a school board meeting or assembly meeting? And with all due respect, I'll leave it that with 49 seconds to spare.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to note to Mr. Haberman that the clerk has been in discussions. I don't need you to say anything. I'm just making a comment. So the clerk's been in discussions, and it's actually, is it true, Mr. Chair, on our agenda for the joint school board meeting to talk about the rest of the schedule for the year?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, if there's no one else to speak, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. We're adjourned.